today's tutorial, we are going to cover how to emulate Atari 2600 and Atari 7800 in Retroarch. So the first thing we're going to need is obviously Retroarch. So browse on over to retroarch.com and click on download. Scroll on down to the bottom to nightly builds. And so today's tutorial is going to cover Windows. If for whatever reason the cores we are going to use in today's tutorial do not show under your platform of choice, it's probably not available on your platform because we are just covering Windows today. So go ahead and click on Windows, x86 64 if you have a 64-bit processor, which I'm really hoping most everyone who's doing anything on a modern computer does by this point. Scroll on down to the very bottom, and we are going to click on retroarch.7zip. If you don't have 7zip, go ahead and download it. It's awesome to have. A lot of things use 7zip these days, so it's very useful to have. If you don't want to do that for whatever reason, you can always download the setup.exe right above it. That is the latest setup.exe that just automatically unzips it for you. Now, if for whatever reason after you get Retroarch downloaded and extracted and you try to launch it and it doesn't work, you need to download this redistributable.7zip right here. Once it's downloaded, go ahead and extract it, run it. It will get you all taken care of and you will be able to launch Retroarch. Once Retroarch has finished downloading, you're going to need to get it extracted. So just go ahead, right click on it, 7zip, extract to Retroarch. That's how I like to do it. And you're going to want to make sure that this folder is placed where you want to keep it after it's done extracting, because the moment you launch Retroarch, it defaults all of its installation files, it defaults all of its folders into itself, so you definitely want to make sure you place it right the first time. Otherwise, you're going to have to delete the config file and basically start from scratch anyway. So just get it right the first time. Save yourself 5 minutes of a headache. Once extracted, go ahead and open up the Retroarch folder and scroll on down to retroarch.exe and go ahead and open it. And from here, we are going to press F on our keyboard to full screen it. And once it is full screened, we are going to go down to Online Updater, Core Updater. We're going to hit right on our keyboard or controller if you have one plugged in, and we're going to go down to Atari. So first one we are going to download today is Atari 2600 Stella. So go ahead and press enter to get that downloaded, and then we're going to go down to Atari 7800 Pro System. Once those are downloaded, go ahead and back out of the Core Updater menu, back to the main menu. And we are going to go ahead and exit out of Retroarch at this time because you are going to need a few things, i.e. games. For both of these Atari cores, there are no BIOS file requirements, so we're not going to spend time talking about the core documentation page this time. So once you have Atari 2600 games and Atari 7200 games, you're pretty much ready to go. So get those games, put them in any folder anywhere on your computer you want. I just have mine on the desktop again for demonstration purposes, listed as Atari 2600 and Atari 7200. So we're going to go ahead and open back up into Retroarch. We're going to go down to show desktop menu because we're just going to make playlists right off the bat today. We're not going to try loading it, make sure the core works. There's no configuration needed here, so it should just work. So we're going to go ahead and make the playlist to make our lives easier. So this is, of course, the Retroarch desktop menu, your best friend when it comes to debugging any issues you might have with Retroarch, as well as getting playlists set up. It's just nice and easy. So right here, we are going to right-click anywhere in this box, new playlist. We're going to start with Atari 2600, so we're going to do Atari space 2600. And hit enter. And now we have this nice Atari 2600 wood grain icon here. We're going to go ahead and right click here and add folder. And we're going to scroll to our desktop where we have that Atari 2600 folder and click select folder. Now for core, we're going to do Stella. Database, we're going to do Atari 2600. And we're going to press OK. And now we have all of our Atari 2600 games right here in our playlist. And now we're going to go ahead and do the same for 7800. Right click, new playlist, Atari 7800. And we get a nice 7800 controller icon here. And once again, add folder, Atari 7200. Pro system for the core, database is 7800. And those are our games. So just a quick note, there is an optional BIOS file for the 7800. I haven't needed it for my little amount of games, so if you do need this for any game, if you have a game that just will inexplicably not run, you could try adding this 7800 BIOS file. I couldn't see really anywhere that it was required in the documentation, so you should be fine without it. Go ahead and close out of the desktop menu. We're going to go ahead and go back into Retroarch, press F to full screen it back up, and we're going to go ahead and quit Retroarch. Now, the reason we quit Retroarch is so that the playlist will actually show up on the main menu. So now we can just go ahead and double click back into Retroarch, press left on our keyboard or controller, and now we have two wonderful playlist entries for Atari 2600 and Atari 7800. Now, if you're only looking to make simple playlists, that's all you need to know. But if you want to add cover art or anything to it, you can actually go back into the online updater, thumbnail updater, and download the Atari 2600 zip file and Atari 7800 zip file. Now when you go back, they should show up if they are named properly. Unfortunately for my Atari set, I didn't do that. So I'm going to show you an easy way to fix this. We're going to go ahead and go back into that desktop menu. We're going to pull that over here, and now we are going to go ahead and pull up our Retroarch folder. We're going to click on thumbnails, Atari 2600, named box arts, and this is all of our box arts for every Atari game that there is. So just go ahead and find the one you need for your game. So I need boxing right here. So I have boxing selected, we have boxing right here, so we're just going to go ahead and drag it right there, and now that is our boxing cover art. Same for combat, missile command, and of course Pac-Man. And there we are. Now we can go ahead and exit back out of this and head back into Retroarch, press F once again, and now all of our games have cover art. That's basically it as far as setup goes. Now we can just go ahead and enjoy games. So I'm just going to go ahead and load up some Pac-Man, because this was the very first game I ever played in my entire life, and I have a fondness for it, even though I know it is a terrible version of Pac-Man. Now, as many of you may know, the Atari 2600 and 7800 actually featured hardware switches on the console itself to determine what level, what difficulty, what game modes you were playing. So if you have a controller plugged in, you use the select button to scroll between these game modes. Right here we have Pac-Man level 1 single player or 2 player, level 2 1 player, and so on and so forth. Your select button is your friend, and once you have the game mode that you want, you just press your start button and you are good to go. Anyway, now that we got games running, let's talk about some of the things we can do for the Atari cores, because both Atari 2600 and 7800 core files do not feature any additional options. So when you scroll down to options, there's literally nothing here. So there's nothing really to configure for Atari 2600 and 7800. But what we can do is improve video quality. I actually had this question asked the other day in my PlayStation tutorial on how to make these images sharper, because you know when you play in emulators, you're greeted with really sharp pixels, but that is not the case by default on Retroarch. Retroarch has opted to enable a bilinear filter, which blurs the image to make it look more realistic of an actual upscaled video game console. So I've always just kind of appreciated it and never really thought about how to get rid of it and get back that traditional emulator style appearance that you would find on standalone emulators. So what we're gonna do is, while we have our game loaded up here, we're gonna go ahead and press F1, and we are going to press backspace or B on our controller, and we are going to scroll over to this settings tab. Now over here on this settings tab, we're going to go to video, and we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we are going to disable this bilinear filtering. And now when we go back into Retroarch, we can see all of the sharp pixels that you would come to expect from any standalone emulator. There's some other options in here that we can go over as well that I've never really talked about in any other videos that some of you might actually enjoy. So there's actually a way to integer scale the image. So instead of it just taking up your full screen and being non-integer, which could result in some scrolling artifacts if you are sensitive to such things. I am not, so I've never really noticed it, but you can actually turn on and off integer scaling, so that way, instead of it taking up a full 1080p screen like on my setup, it would do 960p. So it just puts a little bit of a border around everything and makes sure that everything is a perfect 4x upscale. And as you can see, it doesn't really reduce the image a whole lot. And from here, it only feels appropriate to talk about our favorite thing in the world, and that is, of course, the shaders. So we are going to go back over to our Retroarch main menu to get back into our quick menu. And we're going to scroll down to the bottom where we find the shaders. Now, of course, you all know how much I love CRT easy mode by this point if you watch the channel. So load shader preset, shaders GLSL, CRT easy mode. There it is. That is, of course, my favorite shader, and I think it just looks fantastic, especially in motion. Looks very clean, looks like a PVM or Sony Trinitron, which is what I'm used to. PVM's obviously nicer, but it just provides nice, clean grid scan lines, and I'm a huge fan of this one. It just looks pretty to me. Now, of course, there's a lot of other presets and other shader possibilities you can really combine. If you know what your favorites are, you can go ahead and apply them here. But if you want something authentic, you can always go with the Royal NTSC filters. So let's take this 256 pixel composite filter shader, for example. Now when we go back into our game, we are met with a picture that is a lot less crisp. There's some flickering, color bleed, and it looks very authentic to using component cables. Now let's say you want the old school 70s, 80s tube TV feel where you used to get that screen curvature. Let's go ahead and load up one more shader preset here. We're gonna load up the Geom shader. So this one gives us really nice scan lines, really good blurring, authentic of an older CRT, and it does curve those edges of the image, bringing it to a wonderful, wonderful reminiscent look of what these TVs did look like back in the day. So now that you've seen a couple examples of shaders, just go through them, see which one you like. For me, of course, it will always be easy mode. It just makes me feel like I'm playing on my Trinitron. I love it so much. So for me, it's always going to be easy mode. And after I have that selected, I'm going to save my core preset. This way, whenever I load up anything in Stella, it's going to look exactly like this. It's all good to go. Everything is done. And now that everything else is set up too, I'm going to go ahead and save my core override. And now I'm going to go ahead and close out of Stella. I'm going to close Atari 2600. Let's talk about Atari 7800 real quick. So same drill, there are no core options for us to mess with on Atari 7800 for Pro System. So it's all just going to come down to how you want this image quality to look. So again, we can go back out into the system settings here and go to video, and we can disable bilinear filtering again to really sharpen up the picture. We can go ahead and make it so it's integer scaled. And then we can go ahead and add our shaders. So for me, it's once again just going to be CRT easy mode. And that is basically it as far as Atari 7800 emulation in Pro System is concerned. It is the exact same setup steps as Atari 2600. There's no core options, so all you really need to do is figure out how you want your video output to look and set it up. And just like on Atari 2600, once you have that set up how you want it, make sure you save your core presets. That way, whenever you load them up, that is exactly what you're going to get. And that is it. That's really all there is to getting Atari 2600 and Atari 7800 emulation up and running in Retroarch. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section below. I would love to help you out. And I just want to thank you all again for watching these tutorials. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, dislike button, depending how much you like the video. And of course, hit that sub button so we can keep the channel growing. It has grown so much over the last year, and I can't thank you all enough for that. So until next time, everybody, game freaking on, go enjoy some Atari, and we will see you all back next video.